Thursday, January 23rd, 2020 at 4 p.m. For the call to order, we have present tonight via electronic means, Councilman Porter, Councilman Carn, Councilman Willden, Councilman McOmb, and Councilman Podesta. So we do have a quorum for this evening. I've asked Councilman Porter to lead us in our invocation, and then Dave Johnson, our Economic Development Director, to lead us in our Pledge of Allegiance.
Are we set? Our dear Heavenly Father, we're grateful for the opportunity to meet together as a City Council of Saratoga Springs and to discuss issues facing the city and to plan for its future and to be able to represent the citizens well. We're grateful for all those who serve either as first responders in public safety or in the military. We ask you to watch over them, that they'll be protected as they protect our freedoms. And we say these things in the name of thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Audience, please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You may be seated.
Okay, tonight on our agenda we have business item 1, consideration of resolution to initiate proceedings under the pending ordinance doctrine in Utah Code Section 10-9A509 and City Code Section 19.02.02.206 with respect to removal of conditional uses, Resolution R20-8.
So there's some things at play here. One is the pending ordinance doctrine. So the Utah Code allows for future applications to be subject to pending ordinance. And the code does allow us to define what a pending ordinance is, which we have defined as a code that is being considered by the city that has been attached to a resolution declaring the council's intent to initiate proceedings to amend the code. And the issue in question today is the conditional use permit, which under Utah law is actually a permitted use. It's sort of a misnomer because it is a permitted use, and the Utah Code does require us to have standards that apply to conditional use permits. So there's no ability for a land use authority to basically come up with conditions out of the air, so to speak. They have to be conditions that are spelled out in the code. And this raises a concern because I think that there's been a misunderstanding of what a conditional use actually is. And based on that, my understanding is the council would like to, at the time, under the pending ordinance doctrine, strike conditional uses in the code and direct the Planning Commission to start looking at these conditional uses and determine if they either need to be permitted uses or prohibited uses. And if there are certain types of conditional uses, to establish standards that apply to those particular uses. And when I say conditional uses, what I mean is what are currently conditional uses. Eventually, of course, those will be changed to permitted uses where we spell out the conditions for approval of those uses. A good example is in our home occupations right now are treated in the code as a conditional use. But we do have a chapter, which is 1908, that talks about home occupations and defines standards for those home occupations. And what we're suggesting is that the council look at the at all conditional uses in the same manner, that you spell out the specific standards and criteria for approval or denial of those uses. And so, anyway, that's a quick explanation. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer any questions that the council may have.
Any questions from the council?
I just had one question for Kevin. You had talked about in the email I received last night. You had talked about what I'm fine exempting or getting rid of the conditional uses and just using the code in the residential. But you had talked about just doing the non-residential, getting rid of non-residential commercial uses or doing them all. Is there one that would be better than the other from your standpoint? I'm sorry if this question got asked last night and I wasn't there.
Well, we didn't. Okay, could you repeat the question?
I'm just wondering if there's a preference from your standpoint. In the email that you sent last night or yesterday, you talked about getting rid of commercial use or conditional use permits in non-residential zones. And then you talked about just getting rid of conditional use permits across the board. I'm just wondering which one of those do you find preferable from your standpoint?
So my recommendation is, because a conditional use is a form of a permitted use, it's basically it's a misnomer, so it's been misnamed.
Right.
My recommendation is just to call it either permitted use or prohibited use, basically.
Just across the board, and then go back and fix whatever conditional uses used to be allowed and put them in as permitted where they're appropriate.
Correct. And the reason why is because the public has an understanding of what they believe to be a conditional use, and they think that there's a lot of discretion for approval of that conditional use. And so when the land use authority, when the council is acting as the land use authority, or the planning commission, or whoever, the planning director, whoever is acting as that land use authority, the public thinks that they have discretion to say yes or no, or to impose any number of conditions on that use. And so it's a little bit of it's really difficult, because the land use authority doesn't know how to reconcile what the public's expectation is and what they legally can do. The law says a conditional use has to be approved if we can mitigate any detrimental impacts in accordance with established standards. So do you see that it's very, it's not discretionary at all. It's very code-based and fact-based, and you're applying standards to determine what conditions to apply. And so it essentially has been converted, and that's the state legislature that's done that. It's been converted from what used to be something where you had some discretion to now strictly being a permitted use. So it's about what the public's expectations are versus what the land use authority or the council planning commission can do based on what the state law is. The one thing that was brought up by the planning department is they do process a large number of home occupations, and they suggested that this process, this pending ordinance, while we make these amendments and send it to the planning commission, that it could tie up some of these home occupations and result in some frustrations by the residents who want to receive a home occupation. And so it was suggested and this is for the council's consideration today, that home occupations just simply be changed from conditional uses to permitted uses. And the reason why is because Chapter 1908 does address home occupations and has those standards listed, like I mentioned earlier. And so if the council chooses to do that, so that the planning department can continue to process those home occupation permits, that I believe is staff's recommendation.
Okay.
Is that correct? And I'll just look over the planning department. I think that, yeah, they're just
nodding their
confirming
heads.
that that's the case.
Okay. Any other questions? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
I move to approve business item 1 on the agenda as stated on the agenda with all staff findings and conditions. And do we need to make a stipulation changing home occupations to a permitted use? Or is
Yeah.
that part
Yes,
of
you
the?
do. Yes, you do. Right now,
I
the
would,
draft,
please.
the draft shows as just removing that as a conditional use. So you'd have to,
Okay.
yeah, you'd have to make.
And
your motion
adding language
like
to designate home occupations as permitted use in residential zones.
Yep. Okay, I have a first from Councilman Porter.
I'll second.
I have a second from Councilman McOmb. Any further discussion? Councilman Carn?
Aye.
Porter?
Aye.
Willden?
Aye.
McOmb?
Aye.
Podeska?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. We will adjourn the meeting. Thank you guys for attending.
Thank you.